Welcome to the free GMAT prep hour. We're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all for showing up early. I hope it hasn't been too awkward sitting there staring at me passing the last 5 minutes on this video screen, but I wanted to make sure that you all could see me and hear me. And on that note, could you just type into the chat window something like hello if you can hear me? Just want to make sure that we are all able to hear. Awesome. Good to know. Okay, thank you. Yeah, so my name is Allison Bell, and I am a GMAT and LSAT instructor for Manhattan Prep. We're here for GMAT tonight, and I've been teaching with Manhattan Prep for about 8 years. And I am located in the San Francisco Bay Area, but I know we probably have folks joining us from all over the country or even the world tonight. So welcome and thank you for coming. I wanted to start by just getting a sense of where everyone is at with their GMAT studying. So I'm going to put out a little poll, and what I'm going to ask you to do is just poll in to give me an idea of how far along you are in your studying. So it's going to be an A through E poll. We'll say A is I am just starting with my studying. We'll go all the way up to E is I am just about to take the test. So this is more of a review for me. And C would be I'm right smack in the middle. Or you can choose anywhere in between. So I'm going to share a poll, and it should show up and ask you to pick an answer. If you're just joining us, I'm just asking everybody to poll in with where you're at with your GMAT prep right now. Are you just starting out? Are you kind of in the middle of it? Are you just about to take the test? Or somewhere else along the spectrum? All right, cool. I'm going to share the results of our poll so you can see that we are kind of all over the place. We've got one person just starting out, and then most folks are either in the middle of their prep or just about to take the test. So that's awesome. I wish you luck. Hopefully tonight will be a good review for you as you're preparing for your test. And those of you who are just starting out, welcome to the GMAT journey. So let me clear this off. Before we get started, if you are interested in some more free options through Manhattan Prep, there's a few things that you can do after this free prep hour. One is that you can try a live GMAT class. You can try session 1 of any of our courses for free with no obligation to take the full course. You just sign up through our website as a trial student. You can also try out our interactive on-demand course. And if you're interested, the website link is at the bottom, and you can go there to learn more about them. All right, so let's talk about the plan for tonight. We are going to be talking about one of my favorite parts of the GMAT, which is data sufficiency tonight. Sounds like some of you probably already have some experience with data sufficiency, so hopefully this will be a good review for you of best practices with data sufficiency and a chance to see what you know, see what you can do under pressure. Some of the things that we'll discuss tonight are your approach to data sufficiency. For those of you who are just starting out with your GMAT, we'll make sure that you know just what data sufficiency is at all. We'll cover some of the basics like the data sufficiency answer choice grid, how to prove insufficiency, strategies like testing cases, and we'll wrap it all up with a conclusion. And we'll spend most of the lesson today just trying out some data sufficiency problems, so you'll be able to pick up some math or quant content along the way. So let's get started. I'm going to give you your first data sufficiency question. You'll want some scratch paper, and I'm going to time you on this one. If you know how long you should spend on one of these questions, type it into the chat window. How many minutes do you think I'm going to give you? 2, nice. Yeah, so if you're new to the GMAT, you'll find that timing is a really important part of it. And if you are reviewing, you're probably deep into your timing strategy, but you want to be spending about 2 minutes on each question. And if you're getting to 2 minutes and it's not going very well for you, you might be wanting to think about bailing so that you can save your time for other GMAT questions, because the GMAT really values you getting to the end of the test. So I'm going to give you 2 minutes, and I'll put a poll up. When you are done, go ahead and poll in your answer. All right, that is 2 minutes. Looks like everybody has chimed in, and I gave you a few more seconds after you finished, just in case you decided you wanted to rethink your answer. I'm curious if there's anyone out there for whom this was your first question like this, your first data sufficiency question. Give me a shout out in the chat window so that I know you're there. I know that some of you were probably have done quite a few of these questions at this point. We'll do a quick refresher on how data sufficiency works, and then we'll dive into this question. So if you've seen data sufficiency questions before, you know that they're kind of special, unique to the GMAT, certainly. What is special about them is that instead of asking you to just find a solution to a traditional math problem, what you have to do is answer the question of whether the 2 statements you've been given are sufficient to answer the question that you've been given. So you don't necessarily always need to actually answer the question. For example, in this case, what is the value of n? You notice that there are no numbers down in the answer choices. You don't have to tell the GMAT what n actually is. Instead, you have to decide, is each of these statements sufficient to answer the question, what is the value of n? And you're given some options. If you've been studying the GMAT for a while, you probably have seen these options a million times, and you definitely want to make sure that you have them memorized before you take the test whenever you're ready to do that. If this is your first data sufficiency question, take a minute to take a look at the answer choices, because you're going to want to memorize them. We have a little acronym that we use to help us understand and remember the statements. It's 1, 2, 10. So 1 for statement 1 alone is sufficient. 2 for statement 2 alone is sufficient. Notice that each of those excludes the other statement. So just one statement is sufficient, but not the other. T goes along with answer choice C, that you need both statements together, but neither one by itself is sufficient. E for each statement alone is sufficient. And then N, if even putting the 2 statements together, it's not going to be sufficient. So When you're starting off with data sufficiency, the first thing you want to do is make sure that you know what question you're being asked to answer. So you'll notice at the top of my work here, I put n equals question mark because I want to see are these statements going to be sufficient to answer that question. And then you want to pick one of the statements that you're going to test first to determine whether that statement is sufficient. Now, you can start with either statement, 1 or 2. You definitely want to play the GMAT on your own terms. So you want to pick the statement that seems easiest for you to test, so that you're like, oh, I think it'll be pretty easy to figure out whether that statement is enough to answer the question. For this case, the statements both look pretty straightforward. So I'm just going to go ahead and start with statement 1. I almost always make a little chart like this for data sufficiency on my actual scratch paper to keep myself organized. So I'll have a 1 and I'll work out the statement 1 sufficiency for that under that space, and then I'll do the same for statement 2. So let's check out statement 1. It tells me that n is even, and I also need to make sure I'm following the constraints that I've been given in the question. So I know that n has to be within that set. So I'm going to ask you to type in the chat windows, based on statement 1, what are some possible values of n? What is n based on statement 1? Nice, thank you, Tom and Alexa. So I see if n is even, n could be 36, n could be 38, or n could be 42. So what do you think? Is statement 1 sufficient for us to know the value of n? Yeah, definitely not. If we have multiple values when we're asked to find a single value, then that is an example of a statement that is insufficient. All right. Now, if you're experienced with the GMAT, then you might be familiar with what I'm about to do. If I know that statement 1 is insufficient and I've done my hard work of memorizing the answer choices, then I can right off the bat eliminate a couple of answer choices. Take a look at the answer choices and tell me what answers can I eliminate if statement 1 is insufficient. Yeah, so statement or answer choice A and answer choice D would both tell us that statement 1 is sufficient, but we know that it's not, so we can eliminate them both. And that leads me to an important tool in data sufficiency, which is the answer choice grid. If you are starting your work with statement 1, then you can make a grid on your paper that looks like this. A, D, B, C, E. And you want it to be to look pretty much exactly like that. The reason for that is if you're able to determine that statement 1 is insufficient, then there are 2 answer choices you can cross off. And so you go ahead and cross them off immediately. And then you have 3 remaining answer choices, and you're going to work through them in order. If you get to a place where you have to guess on a question because you spent 2 minutes working on it, using this answer choice grid significantly improves your chances of guessing correctly. It also gives you a really good methodical process for working through data sufficiency. So we know it's not A or D, so we're going to move on now to test statement 2 and see if statement 2 is sufficient. All right, if n is a multiple of 3, what could it be? Type it in the window. Nice. Thanks, Alexa, Maggie, Tom, Madeline. Yeah, n could be 33. It could be 36. It could be 39. It could be 42. By the way, if you didn't immediately recognize all of those as multiples of 3, does anybody know how you can tell? If I have a number, how can I tell if it's a multiple of 3? Yeah, so if I add the digits up of any number, if it is divisible by 3, then I know that that number is a multiple of 3, even if I wasn't sure just by looking at it. So like maybe you weren't sure if 42 is divisible by 3, but 4 plus 2 is 6, and that is divisible by 3. And that's a good test to know for the GMAT. That'll come up in multiple situations. Okay. So once again, we've got a statement that gives us multiple possible values of n. So this statement too is not going to be sufficient for us to answer the question, what is the value of n? So what answer choice can I eliminate? Yeah, I can eliminate B. Statement 2 by itself is not sufficient. Oh, interesting. Yeah, I'm not ready to eliminate C just yet because I haven't actually tried it out. What C is telling me is that if I put both statements together, they're sufficient, but neither statement alone is sufficient. And maybe you already have tried it out, and so you're ready to eliminate C, but I still have to do some testing here. So if you eliminate A and D and then you eliminate B, your next step is to test the statements together. So I usually just go to the bottom of my chart and I make a new little space for myself to test the two statements combined. If it's complicated, I might write down the information again. So I know that n in this case is going to be even and it's going to be a multiple of 3. And I want to see if I can figure out what n is. So type it in the chat window. What can n be if it's even and it's a multiple of 3? Yeah, we can take our work from statements 1 and 2 and use this to make our thinking a little faster. Our n cases should overlap between those two statements, and they do. So n could be 36 or 42, which tells us that even together, the statements are not sufficient, at which point the only answer left for me to choose is answer choice E. So answer choice E is the correct answer here. About half of the folks who pulled in got this one correct. So nice work. Kudos to you if you got this one right. If you have any questions about this one, feel free to type them in the chat window. If not, we're going to talk about a couple key takeaways and then move on to another question. So if you're just getting started with data sufficiency, a few initial steps that you want to take on any of these questions. First, you want to make sure that you know what the question is asking. In that last question, it was pretty simple, but sometimes it gets more complicated. You want to choose the easiest statement to start with so that you can be as efficient as possible, especially if you end up needing to guess. And you're going to make an answer grid based on that choice. The answer grid that we made was A, D, B, C, E. But if you decide to start with statement 2, it changes the grid a little bit. You swap out A for B because you're going to first test to see if statement 2 alone is sufficient. And then you're going to try to prove the statement insufficient. So let's try this again with another question. I'll give you 2 minutes. Please pull in when you are ready. All right, that is 2 minutes. I see most of your answers in. Thank you. Type in the chat window, which statement did you decide to start with for this one? Okay, so far I'm seeing mostly statement ones. That seems reasonable to me, so we can start with statement one. I'm going to write out our question up here, and I'm going to rephrase it just because those less than and greater than signs can sometimes get switched up, in my mind at least. And on the GMAT, I try to do everything I can to make sure that I'm not going to accidentally make a careless mistake under time pressure. So they asked me, is x less than 0? I'm going to rewrite, is x negative? And then I'm going to check out statement 1. So statement 1 tells me that negative 2x is greater than 0. Now, some of you may have found a cool way to figure out kind of the theory behind this question and reason it out, maybe even without testing too many cases. This is a question where the GMAT is testing your understanding of one of its favorite topics, positive and negatives. So there's a lot of different possible approaches to each of these statements, and it looks like most of you found one that works. One possible approach is to manipulate the algebra here. So negative 2x is greater than 0. You can draw my little greater than sign. You can divide both sides by negative 2. What happens when you divide by a negative? What do you have to do if you've got an inequality? Yeah, you have to flip the sign. Nice. Again, another place where it's easy to accidentally miss that step. But if you do it the algebraic way, then you get x is less than 0, which is exactly what the question was asking. So we know that this is sufficient. If you weren't too sure, you were like, oh, I think there's some algebra to do here, but I know there's a rule about flipping the sign, and I'm not sure if I can divide this by negative 2. You could also reason through it a couple of other ways. One simple way to handle a lot of these data sufficiency questions is just to test some cases, to try some things out that meet what the statement is asking and see how they answer the question. So I might try some numbers for x and see how they work out. So maybe I would start by picking a simple number like 2. And what I'm going to find is I always, if I'm testing cases, I always ask myself if that case is valid, which means does it meet what the statement says? So if I multiply negative 2 times 2, I'm going to get a negative number, and statement 1 is telling me it needs to be positive. So it's not valid, and I have to cross it out. And as I continue testing numbers, what I'm going to notice is that in order to make this work out to be greater than 0, I'm going to have to test negative numbers. So negative 2 times negative 2 would give me 4. And then it is valid, and the answer to my question, is x less than 0, is going to be yes. And every case that I'm going to test is going to end up having to be negative. This is checking your understanding of a rule about positive and negative numbers in order to turn a negative into a positive. You need to multiply it by another negative. So negative times a negative is a positive. If you know that, then you can just kind of reason through that. Statement 2, x cubed is less than 0. Again, if you know your positives and negatives theory, that makes this statement a little bit easier. If not, you can try picking a number for x and seeing if you can make it work. So this time maybe I'll start with x is negative 2. I know that if I multiply negative 2 times itself 3 times, I'm going to end up with negative 8. And if I try x equals 2, then x cubed is going to end up being positive 8. And that is because of a rule about exponents and evens and odds. If I take an exponent, or I take a number, I should say, and I raise it to an even power, like 2, is the result going to be positive or negative? Yeah, it doesn't matter whether x is positive or negative. X squared, x to the 4th, x to the 6th, those are always going to be positive numbers. But if I take a number and I raise it to an odd exponent, like x cubed, then the result is going to keep the sign of the original number. So if it was a negative number, it's going to stay a negative number. If it was a positive number, it's going to stay a positive number. And again, that is dependent on whether the exponent is even or odd. So in this case, if we know that x cubed turns out to be a negative number, the only way for that to happen is if the original number x was negative as well. So statement 2 is sufficient, in which case we use our AD BCE grid. We eliminate BCE because we proved that statement 1 was sufficient. And when we test statement 2, we're able to choose answer choice D, which is that each statement alone is sufficient. You all did really well on this one. You might be ready for some harder stuff. Nice work. If you have questions, type them into the chat window. If not, we will move on to another question. One quick note, this question was different from the first one that we did because the first one that we did was a values question. It was asking you to come up with an actual value for the variable, whereas this one was a yes/no question. And the way that you prove data sufficiency changes depending on whether you're looking for a value or looking for a yes or a no. If the question is asking you for a specific value, then if it's always the same value, that's going to be sufficient. But if a statement allows you to have different possible values, then it's insufficient. If you're getting a yes/no question, then in order to prove sufficiency, you need to always get a yes or always get a no. To prove a statement insufficient, you need to get a sometimes yes, sometimes no. So you're able to find some situations where the answer is yes, some situations where the answer is no. All right, let's take a look at our next question. The formatting came out a little weird on this one, so the question is referring to the little red box up in the upper right-hand corner. I took away the answer choices here because I want you to try to start memorizing them. So you can use the 1 to 10 acronym to help you remember what the answer choices are, and I can refresh your memory after the 2 minutes is up. All right, that is 2 minutes. This question is a little bit more brutal than the last couple that we did. So the GMAT likes to do this from time to time to give you some kind of weird formatting to ask you a question and make it look a little bit more like a puzzle. So the first thing that you want to do is make sure that you rephrase the question in a way that you understand. So here they use a box and a triangle to represent certain digits within a number. So I would maybe rewrite that number. We've got 3.2, then we get 1 digit, another digit, and then we get a 6. And it looks like the square is representing the hundredths digit. So we want to know, what is the hundredths digit of this number? Is it possible to figure it out based on any one of these statements? So let's take a look at statement 1 first. So it tells us that when the decimal is rounded to the nearest tenth, 3.2 is the result. So I have 3.2 followed by something in the hundredth digit, then something in the thousandth and the 10,000th digit. And I know that when I look from my 10th digit over here, and I use the hundredth digit to round, I end up with 3.2. Can you type some numbers into the chat window that would work with statement 1, that we could complete this number and round to the nearest tenth and get 3.2? Okay, so I see 1, 2, 3, 4. Right, so any of those numbers, 0 as well, if I were to plug them in for the hundredth digit, they would work. So I could just make up a number like 3.2196. And the digit I care about the most, of course, is the hundredths digit, which is in the box. So if I have 3.2196, that works. 2 will look over to the 1. It's less than 5, so it's going to round down to 3.2. But I could also do 3.2496. And again, look over to the hundredths digit. It's less than 5, so this number is going to round down to 3.2 as well. So I've got 2 different possible numbers for my hundredths digit while still satisfying statement 1. So we're going to go ahead and say statement 1 is insufficient. And hopefully you're able to remember your answer choice grid, but I'll put it up here, A, D, B, C, E. If statement 1 is insufficient, then we're going to go ahead and cross off A and D. And move on over to statement 2. So this time they're telling me if the statement, or if the decimal is rounded to the nearest hundredth, we're going to get 3.24. So I'm looking from my hundredths place now, and I'm going to look over to my thousandths place and round. Go ahead and type into the chat window for me. I want you to give me a complete number, like in this form, 3.2 something something 6. What is a number that would work with statement 2? Okay, so I'll put a couple of them in here. I see 3.2406. 3.2396. So we'll check these. So if they're valid, when I round to the nearest hundredth, I should get 3.24. So first one, my 4 looks over to the thousandth place, sees that it's a 0 and rounds down. And so I do end up with 3.24. So that's a valid test case. Second one, my 3 looks over to the thousandths place and sees that it's greater than 5, or 5 or greater, and rounds up to 3.24. So both of these examples round to 3.24. But when I look back at my question, what is the digit in the box? What is the hundredths digit? I see that I have two different numbers. So once again, I've got an insufficient statement. So now I'm going to move on to testing answer choice C. And I'm just going to make a little space for it at the bottom of my grid. And I'm going to cross off B. So now I need something, an example where 3.2 is what I get if I round to the nearest tenth, and 3.24 is what I get if I round to the nearest hundredth. So one more time, I'm going to ask you to type in a number that meets both of those statements, a full number in the format 3.2 blank blank 6, something that meets both of those statements. Okay, nice. I see people drawing from our previous examples, which is a great thing to do to make yourself more efficient. Check to see if you've already created an example that will work. So 3.2396 would round to 3.2 if I look over to the 3, or to 3.24 if I look over to the hundredths. And in that one, our hundredths digit is 3. And then I see somebody put in 3.2436. This would round to 3.2 if we round to the tenths, and 3.24 if we round to the hundredths, but I have a different digit in the box. And so the two statements combined are insufficient, which means that we have answer choice E as our correct answer. Nice work, everybody. This is a great example of a question where it might be hard to kind of wrap your head around it at first, but rephrasing it and doing a couple of testing cases to try to prove each statement insufficient is a very valuable tool on this question. All right. So again, tricky questions you want to rephrase, and you want to test cases in order to try to prove insufficiency. Try to get those multiple answers to the question. Here is another one. I will give you 2 minutes. All right, that's 2 minutes. So this is another question that's testing some specific quant content. So if you looked at this and you thought to yourself, I don't remember what equilateral means, then this might be a good question for you to go ahead and take a guess on and move on to other questions that you might have more knowledge about and more strategies for. And then when you're studying for the GMAT, make yourself a flashcard that gives you the definition of equilateral and some things that you want to think about. So what is an equilateral triangle? What do we know about an equilateral triangle? Type it in the chat window. Nice. Okay, so I see folks typing a few awesome things into the chat window. All angles are equal. All sides and angles are equal. 60-degree angles. Good. That's definitely something you want to know before you take the GMAT test. For this particular question, since it's focused on angles, what we really need to know is that all angles in an equilateral triangle are equal. Since we should know that a triangle has 180 degrees, if we want to know how many angles or how many degrees there are in each angle, we would divide 180 by 60, and we would know that each angle has 60 degrees in an equilateral triangle. So if I wanted to rephrase this question, I could say, are all the angles equal? Or even, are all angles equal to 60 degrees? All right. How many of you, did you guys start with statement 1 or 2? Type in the chat window what you start with. Okay, interesting. So it's funny, you guys had different instincts than me. You started with statement 1, that's fine. Usually if I get like a concrete number like z equals 60, I kind of jump right to that. But we can start with statement 1 together. So I'll make my ADBCE grid, and I start working on statement 1, x is equal to y. Well, if I know that x is equal to y, then I know x could be 60, and y could be 60, and z could definitely be 60 as well. And that would give me a yes answer to the question, is the triangle above equilateral? But I'm trying to prove this insufficient, so I want to see if I can come up with a no answer. Could you give me some values, a value for this xy combo that, that would work here? Okay, sure. So we've got x equals 45, y equals 45, and z equals 90. That would definitely make for 180 degrees, but that would also mean that our triangle is not equilateral. And so we would get rid of A and D because answer choice or statement 1 is insufficient. All right, so let's check out statement 2. Now we know that z is equal to 60. Again, we could definitely easily imagine a scenario in which all 3 angles are equal to 60. That doesn't rule it out, so we could say it's possible for this to be a yes case. Can you give me a situation that would make for a no for statement 2? How could z be 60, but this triangle is not equilateral? Cool. So we just want some scenario where the angles add up to 180. So z is 60, y is 80, and x is 40. That would add up to 180, but it would also give us a no. This is not an equilateral triangle. One other thing to know on the GMAT is you might be looking at this triangle and you're like, well, it really looks equilateral. It doesn't look like it could be a 45, 45, 90. I don't see a right angle. On data sufficiency questions on the GMAT, the images are not drawn to scale. And in fact, they can be drawn really, really far off from scale. And so you want to make sure that you kind of just like, if it looks like a triangle, it's a triangle, but there's not much else that you can trust about the degree measures. So a question I see in the chat window, why would one be wrong? Because it is asking if it is equilateral. So if a triangle is equilateral, that means that all the angles are the same. So it's possible with statement 1 for it to be equilateral because I could have X, Y, and Z all be 60 degrees. And that would give me a yes as a response to the question, is it equilateral? But it's also possible for me to have statement 1 be true and X is equal to Y and I get 45, 45, 90, but the triangle is not equilateral. My goal with data sufficiency is I want this statement, statement 1, to give me a clear yes or a clear no. And in this case, it is possible for me to use statement 1 to come up with a yes to the triangle is equilateral, and it's also possible for me to come up with a no to is the triangle equilateral. So that's why it's insufficient. Let me know if you have a follow-up question to that. Okay, so we proved statements 1 and 2 insufficient. So the next thing we would want to do is check out the 2 statements in combination with each other. So we make a little space on our diagram for C. And now we know that X is equal to Y and that Z is 60. So I know some folks picked C. Can you type in the chat window why? How does this prove to me that my triangle is definitely equilateral or definitely not equilateral? Yeah, nice. I see some great explanations. So I know that a whole triangle has to add up to 180 degrees. If Z is 60, then that leaves 120 degrees left for X and Y. And if X is going to be equal to Y, the only way for them to add up to 120 is for them to also be 60. So I end up with a triangle with 3 angles of 60 degrees. And that's the only possible way that the 2 statements together can play out. Since it has to be an equilateral triangle in this case, it has to be 60, 60, 60. Then putting the 2 statements together is sufficient, and answer choice E is our correct answer. Or I'm sorry, I misspoke. Answer choice C. I've gotten used to saying E. We had a lot of those. So correct answer is C. Nice work, everybody. If you missed that one, you may need to just brush up a little bit on your geometry and make sure that you know your equilateral, your isosceles triangles, the number of angles or the number of degrees in a triangle, and all of that. All right. Definitely have time for at least one more question. So here is your next one. Give it a try. Okay, there goes your 2 minutes. And we've been in a pretty even deadlock this whole time between answer choice C and answer choice E. A lot of people kind of shifting around, changing their mind about which one they think is the correct answer. And that is a promising sign. It means that everybody realized there's kind of 2 things we need to know in order to solve this question and get a definitive answer. And neither statement gives us both of those things. If we want to know if these volumes are going to fit the first 10 volumes, definitely want to notice these details, then we need to know how big the book rack is. So we're going to need to know the value of X. But then we're also going to need to know the thickness of the first 10 volumes. So if we take a look at statement 1, we get X only, but we have no idea how thick the first 10 volumes are. So maybe each of those volumes is already 50 centimeters itself, and you can only fit 1 on this bookshelf. Or maybe each volume is 2 centimeters, and together they're going to be 20 centimeters, and they'll fit just fine. So we have a no and a yes case, and so this statement 1 is insufficient, as everybody who polled in seemed to agree. Statement 2, similarly, we don't know how big the bookshelf is. If we don't know how big the bookshelf is, who knows whether these will fit or not. We can imagine scenarios where they do and scenarios where they don't. So then we get into testing both of the statements together, and this is where folks seem to have the most disagreement. So if we test them together, looks a little more promising. We know how big the shelf is. We know that X is 50. And we are given that 12 of the volumes have an average thickness of 5 centimeters. What do you all think? Does that mean that these first 10 volumes are going to fit? Type your thinking into the chat window so I can get an idea. Okay, if you think yes or you think no, try to tell me why so I can dig a little deeper here. Yeah, that's a great response. We don't know which books these 12 books are. Maybe most of the 12 books are not going to go on the shelf. And so we know their average thickness is 5 centimeters, but most of them aren't going on the shelf anyways. And then we have, maybe 2 of them are going on the shelf, and they're, at that point, we don't even know exactly how thick they are because we just have an average. And then it's possible that these other 8 books are much, much thicker. Maybe they're 20 centimeters each. It's also possible that they're much, much thinner. Maybe they're 1 centimeter each. So it would be pretty easy for us to create a scenario where these books can fit on the shelf. And it's also pretty easy for us to create a scenario where these books cannot fit on the shelf because we don't have specific enough information. So answer choice C is insufficient, and we get our favorite answer choice of the evening, E, again. If you have any questions, type them into the chat window. If not, we're going to start reviewing a little bit. Okay. All right, so as we wrap up this evening, think about what you want to remember to do on data sufficiency questions. A couple of things: if you're just starting out, you want to make sure that you memorize the answer choices and that you learn to use the answer grid. Make sure, even if you're an experienced data sufficiency practitioner, that you are deliberately choosing the easy statement to start with. A lot of times people just get into the habit of automatically starting with statement 1 when statement 2 could be a lot easier. Make sure you have a good system for organizing your work. You notice that I used the statement 1 and statement 2 kind of T-chart with a C below it, and that can be a great system for you to use. Make sure that you get comfortable with testing cases to the point where you are able to prove insufficiency. One of the big reasons that people sometimes struggle with data sufficiency questions is they jump to the same conclusion that the GMAT wants them to without actually doing all of the follow-through work on their paper to prove that a statement is sufficient or insufficient. The GMAT is really good at creating traps that make statements look sufficient or insufficient, or make it look like the two statements will be sufficient together. But when you actually put pencil to paper and you try to answer the question, those are not sufficient. So if you're having a hard time with data sufficiency, think about whether you're spending enough time testing cases and whether you're going about testing cases in a strategic way. All right. So thank you all for coming tonight. If you are interested in getting some more in-depth preparation, our courses are excellent, and they teach much more about data sufficiency along with other concepts, and you can check out the schedule for our in-person and online classes on our website there. And remember that you can try our first session of any in-person or online complete course for free. Thank you all for coming tonight. If you have any questions, I'll stick around for a couple of minutes and you can send me one in the chat window. Even if it's a little off topic, I'm happy to take your general GMAT questions. If not, you are free to go. Have a great night. Thanks for coming. Yeah, so Madeline, getting down to 2 minutes, definitely make sure you have the answer choices memorized and you're really solid with that grid. And make sure that you're getting a good review of the content too. A lot of times if it's taking you longer than 2 minutes, it may be that there's some particular concept that you need to work on in terms of the math. Also make sure that you're rephrasing the question. If the question looks super complicated, you want to make sure that you put it into a way that makes sense for you, or simplify it if there's any algebra involved. But otherwise, it's just a lot of practice. Make sure that you're doing at least like 50% of your practice timed so that you're aware of how you're doing. And take some of the questions that you do and that you're able to get the correct answer on and play them again. Look up the solutions. We have a really cool tool on our website called the Navigator that's available to our students that gives you kind of like the most efficient, fastest way. So if you have access to that, that's great. If not, use the solutions in the back of the OG to try to help you figure out if there's something you could have done faster, and then do some replays with those questions. Good, I'm glad it was helpful. All right, I don't see any more questions coming in, so I'm going to go ahead and shut this down. Thanks, everyone.